on AM 560, The Answer.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. How did we go from Secretary of State Anthony Blinken endorsing the idea of the Poles providing planes to the Ukrainians over the weekend to nixing it yesterday, formally? John Kirby, who's the spokesbeing for the Pentagon, explained the administration's decision.
Secretary Austin thanked the minister for Poland's willingness to continue to look for ways to assist Ukraine. But he stressed that we do not support the transfer of additional fighter aircraft to the Ukrainian Air Force at this time, and therefore have no desire to see them in our custody either. Now, let me walk you through the reasons for this. First, we believe the best way to support Ukrainian defense is by providing them the weapons and the systems that they need most to defeat Russian aggression, in particular, anti-armor and air defense. We, along with other nations, continue to send them these weapons, and we know that they are being used with great effect. The slowed Russian advance in the north and the contested airspace over Ukraine is evidence alone of that. Although Russian air capabilities are significant, their effectiveness has been limited due to Ukrainian strategic, operational, and tactical ground-based air defense systems, surface-to-air missiles, and manpads. Secondly, the Ukrainian Air Force currently has several squadrons of fully mission-capable aircraft. We assess that adding aircraft to the Ukrainian inventory is not likely to significantly change the effectiveness of the Ukrainian Air Force relative to Russian capabilities. Therefore, we believe that the gain from transferring those MiG-29s is low.
Now here's the real answer.
And finally, the intelligence community has assessed that the transfer of MiG-29s to Ukraine may be mistaken as escalatory and could result in a significant Russian reaction that might increase the prospects of a military escalation with NATO. Therefore, we also assess the transfer of the MiG-29s to Ukraine to be high risk. And we are grateful for the superb support and cooperation of our Polish allies who continue to host thousands of our troops and who are welcoming more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees. Polish generosity is clearly on display for the whole world to see. But at this time, we believe the provision of additional fighter aircraft provides little increased capabilities at high risk.
Well, what do you got to lose? I'm sure your assessment of how the Ukrainians would hold up under a Russian invasion, which they did know or didn't know. I don't know. We've got confusing statements on that, too, was coming. So perhaps you'd be surprised again what they could do with a couple of dozen Polish MiGs. And what's the downside exactly? So this whole, our assessment is it would be limited in effectiveness, and the Russian air power has been limited in its effectiveness by Ukrainians. That's all just a smokescreen for blinking, as far as I'm concerned, in the face of Putin. And isn't this exactly what Putin expects from the West? That he can outlast the West's attention span for his incursions. He has more resolve than we do.
Yeah, and the right hand's not talking to the left hand.
For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by retired Major General Mick Ryan in the Australian Army. He's a former strategist on the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he's also the author of War Transformed, The Future of 21st Century Great Power Competition and Conflict. General Ryan, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dane and Amy. It's great to be with you.
So what about the position of the United States as it pertains to the provision of Polish planes to the Ukrainians?
I'm not privy to all the discussions that have gone on inside the U.S. government, but at the end of the day, the Russian Air Force has been spectacularly ineffective already. And as recent briefs from both the British and Americans have indicated, Russian air activity has decreased over the last few days. So I think the most important aid that we can give the Ukrainians is anti-aircraft missiles, anti-tank missiles, and a whole range of other logistic support to keep them in the fight.
Yeah, but those things aren't mutually exclusive, and Zelensky is asking for it. So maybe he has a better handle on the reality on the ground than we do. And regardless, again, what's the downside?
Yeah, and I mean, President Zelensky has been an amazing leader. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about that. But he's also called for a no-fly zone, which also I think would risk escalation, not just within Ukraine, but also potentially beyond Ukraine's borders. I mean, if there was a no-fly zone or Poland provided its fighters, what might then stop Russia from striking targets in Poland or beyond that?
Yeah, but he maintained yesterday that if there was a NATO had declared Ukraine's airspace a no-fly zone, that hospital wouldn't have been leveled. That was a maternity hospital and a children's ward. Well, 17 injured, 3 killed, including a 6-year-old child.
There's a difference between a NATO or U.S. enforced no-fly zone and greenlighting the Poles to provide planes to the Ukrainians. There's a complete difference in the nature of those two alleged escalations. And I don't agree with conflating the two of them, General.
Sure, and I appreciate that. But, you know, the risks of escalation here are very real. I mean, there's a careful balance here that the US government and NATO is trying to achieve here because, you know, the Ukrainians are actually doing pretty well. They're getting a lot of support and increasing support from the West. And sometimes, you know, air support may not be the best solution for actually beating the Russians on the ground.
Yeah, but this escalation question, I mean, we could de-escalate entirely and not provide them the $14 billion in aid that Congress is moving their way. We could not provide them the weapons that you were describing, not just the United States, but Western allies as well, and starting with NATO, of course. I mean, we could completely de-escalate and just let Putin have the run of the place because with the approach that we're taking now, particularly the lethargy, according to many military folks, with which some of our weapons, the United States, have gotten to the Ukrainians. I mean, we're buying them time, but we're not changing the eventual outcome of this.
No, I disagree. I think we are slowly changing the outcome because the Russians are running out of time. I mean, the Russians don't own the clocks here, the Ukrainians do. And whilst that might seem a little difficult to see on the ground at the moment, the Russians are becoming more and more desperate for some kind of breakthrough. And at the same time, the Ukrainian capacity is building through the amount of Western volunteers, the Western support that is coming in. So I think the focus on 20-something aircraft coming from Poland should be broadened a little to look at the full extent of Western support, including the sanctions, which are slowly going to strangle Russia.
So where do you think that the battle is at present? And a corollary to that question, has Putin deployed everything he has in his arsenal if he really wanted to make a definitive blow?
Well, I mean, he's deployed all the troops that they assembled for this invasion, up to about 170, 80,000 of them. But clearly, he's got a lot more ground forces in different garrisons in Russia. He's got a lot larger air force, a lot more special forces and Spetsnaz that he could deploy. But he also has other commitments in Syria, but also out to the western parts of his country. So he has to be very careful about not overcommitting his forces here. And he's in real trouble. I mean, they have not gone well. The Russian military, which has had a 10-year modernization campaign, has not performed well. In fact, it's pretty hard to see what they have modernized because in the last few days, they've fallen back into their historic norms, which is just the large-scale use of firepower.
Well, do the Russian troops know what the end game is and why they're doing what they're doing?
Amy, I think that's a really good point. I mean, the Ukrainians know exactly what they're fighting for, right? They're fighting for democracy, they're fighting for their homes, and their president and their military leaders have been very good at telling them that and unifying them. And the Ukrainian information operations at home and globally have been excellent. On the other hand, if you're a young Russian conscript who was told you're going on an exercise for a few weeks and all of a sudden you're given live rounds crossing an international border to invade your neighbour, you've got to be wondering, what the heck am I doing here? It's pretty clear that most of the Russians who've crossed the border to invade Ukraine don't have the same kind of purpose that the Ukrainian defenders have.
You write in a piece in the Sydney Morning Herald that the Ukrainians need to plan for a smart insurgency. Describe what that would look like and what that would potentially accomplish in your view.
Well, I think you've already got areas where the Russians at least claim control. These are the kind of areas where Ukrainian, particularly territorial forces, but others can be carrying out, hits against logistic columns like they're already doing. They don't have to lose the whole country to be setting up an insurgency in the areas where they've already lost. I think it's fair to say that the Ukrainians are likely to lose a little bit more territory, but I don't think they're going to lose all of it. They need to ensure that there are supply lines of people and logistics into an insurgency, that they have the kind of political and strategic outcomes that they desire, and they're clear in the mind of the insurgents, and that they're able to use Western support to provide support to those insurgents so they can carry on the fight in days, weeks, months, or even years ahead.
And that's the horizon that we should understand in terms of the resolve here, if we're going to continue to support Ukraine and prevent them, if it all goes well, sort of your scenario, if it all goes well, that this is going to be a pitched battle in some form or fashion for years, not weeks or months.
It could potentially go that way if there is some kind of stalemate and the country's split. I mean, why would you as a Ukrainian want to give up? You'd want to keep fighting, you'd support an insurgency, and I can see this playing out over months and years in the future.
He is Major General Mick Ryan. He was a former strategist for the United States Joint Chief. He's also the author of the book War Transformed, The Future of 21st Century Great Power Competition and Conflict. Major General Ryan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Inflation just broke a nearly 40-year record thanks to Biden's out-of-control spending, and every second that goes by, you are losing more and more of your hard-earned savings. But you can fight back. Instead of letting Democrats treat your savings like their own piggy bank with trillions spent on their radical far-left agenda, you can protect what you've earned by converting your IRA or 401k into gold with Birch Gold Group. Hi, this is Stephen K. Bennett, and I'm one of Birch Gold's many happy customers. To learn how to set up your own gold IRA, get a free 20-page info kit when you text the word SHELTER to 989898. Gold-backed IRAs make it simple to ensure your savings will be there when you need it in a tax-sheltered account. No matter what happens in Washington, D.C., text SHELTER to 989898 right now to get your free info kit on gold IRAs. There is nothing to buy, no obligation at all. Text SHELTER 989898. Take action. Do it today.
If you're purchasing a new home or refinance your existing home, securing a VA loan or reverse mortgage, you need to call Team Hochberg, your trusted local lender. In fact, I just referred a friend of mine to David Hochberg the other day. Manny,
look at you.
Yeah. Trying to
I
generate-
recommend